Hey, Peppers!
I don't approve of this introduction.
You know you're going to be listening to this.
It was lame the first time,
Every
but kind of
single week.
funny the first time.
And it just gets better and better. It's one of those jokes that keeps growing on you, Dr. Dave.
Yeah, like a
Pepper
tumour.
box. You know what the best thing about this is? We could probably afford the royalties for this song.
Okay, put it down, Chaz.
Every single episode is going to start with you telling me to put that laptop down. Dr. Dave. Oh, hi, Peppers.
Hi, Peppers.
I'm Chaz.
I'm Dr. Dave.
Tell us who you are, Dr. Dave. We haven't said this for a while.
I am David Smith. Dr. David Smith.
That's right, Professor David
No,
Smith.
not Professor. Not Professor David Smith. I'm a doctor.
He's a sex symbol
I
for
have
all
not a
professors.
real doctor either. I have a PhD in political science from the University of Michigan.
That's right. And I'm the guy who lets him in the building. Now, where we left off at the end of last week, 2 days ago, actually, where we left off was we spent an entire episode talking about the protests.
Yes, we
And
did.
we were building up to some kind of solutions because people talk about the politics. They never talk about what to actually do about the police. And we thought we'd end the episode with that. But then some dude walked in from the ABC and chucked us out. Now, that guy did not care about solutions. He was not solutions oriented.
We were
at all.
essentially like squatting in his studio, though.
Nevertheless,
I find it very hard to get angry at the Radio National Religion and Ethics Report. It's like the purest show on the ABC. And I say this as someone who contributes to it sometimes.
he and all of them should care more about us looking after people's souls than anyone. And that's what we're offering. We're offering absolution for criminals and for police who are corrupt.
Yeah. I think we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves in claiming we've got solutions.
No, we definitely should not. It's not that easy, unfortunately. But let's move on to it. Let's offer what we've got.
We're talking police reforms.
Okay, yeah.
Right?
Now we should say we need solutions because they've gotten even worse. In the last 2 days, the police situation is going worse. Have you seen those dudes who have turned up, who are just standing around Washington?
Yes.
With no uniform, no one knows what agency they are, no name tags. They're like Bill Barr's angels.
Yes.
It's like extras from Mad Max Fury Road have just shown up and just standing around Washington.
So, I mean, it's not they've got no uniforms. They have this sort of vaguely military garb. There's an array of like private security firm outfit
and
logos.
and
there's correctional facility logos on there.
And there's like dark blue T-shirts as well.
Some of them from Texas.
It's like the Expendables, except they've got pot bellies.
Right, yes.
It's like a C-grade action movie.
When they're asked who they're with, they just say Department of Justice.
Yeah.
And no identifying insignia at all. It does appear a lot of them are corrections officers. Now,
but there's no accountability.
So why is this happening? Why are they all there? There's a very specific reason for this.
Tell me why, Dr.
It's because the military is actually showing as subtly but as clearly as it can that it doesn't really want any part of this.
Yeah.
So basically,
Mark Esper wasn't subtle.
No, through every communications channel possible, they are basically saying, fuck you, we are not going into any state we're not invited to, and we're not even happy about being in DC.
Not only was Mark Esper not subtle, but also every single defense person who has worked for Donald Trump for the last 3 years wasn't subtle. They've all come out one after another.
I mean, General Milley's Banana Republic general stroll around DC the other night was an absolute embarrassment and a disgrace, and I think that's been fairly widely recognised. We had good old Mad Dog's interview with The Atlantic just in the last day or so.
Chaos. Trump called him Mad Dog, even though he was called Mad Dog years beforehand.
He basically suggested that Trump was violating the Constitution and the military should have nothing to do with it.
Can I just add one thing about that, by the way?
Yeah.
And that is, I feel like Mad Dog was misrepresented somewhat by a number of people who suggested he compared Trump to Nazis.
No, he didn't.
And he didn't in any way, shape or form.
No, he didn't. He was saying he was making a comparison about the circumstances under which military should follow orders.
Yeah, and basically he was saying the Nazis tried to break us down using this concept. And he was saying, so let's not use that concept to break ourselves down. He wasn't comparing any Americans to Nazis. He was talking about the concept.
But anyway, so Trump's response was to claim, first of all, that he'd given him the nickname Mad Dog, which is just a very strange thing to lie about because he's had it since 2008. And also to claim that he fired Mad Dog, which he didn't. Mad Dog resigned. Sure, he probably would have got fired at some point, but he's made this big thing out of, he was bad under Obama, so Obama fired him, and then I fired him too.
Yeah.
Like skipping over the step where he hired him.
And the very angry resignation letter that Mads wrote.
Now, we will come back to Mad Dog because there's been a lot of speculation about what kind of cover does this potentially give to other conservatives who might be thinking about breaking. But, okay. But getting back to...
Let's talk to solutions.
This situation of all of these guys who we don't even know where they're from hanging around in the streets of DC. So what do we want instead, Jess?
Okay, so we need to have some police solutions. So first of all, let's talk about Mr. Ideas himself. I am, of course, speaking about Joe Biden, who has a great solution for police violence.
Shoot people in the leg.
That's the one. Quote, there are a lot of different things that can change about police training. One example is if the cops are rushed by an unarmed person with a knife or something, they could shoot them in the leg instead of the heart is a very different thing. That's true. It is a very different thing.
It is a very different thing. A lot of things are very different from other things.
Can I just throw a stat at you that's somewhat related to this?
Yeah.
Between 1998, this is a RAND report on the NYPD.
Yeah.
Between 1998 and 2006, the average hit rate in a gunfight by police officers in the NYPD was 18%.
Wow, that's like sub-Star Wars level.
And the average hit rate in situations where, because you're in a gunfight, they're firing at you, you're ducking and weaving, The average hit rate in situations where fire was not being returned, you were the only person firing, 30%. So don't aim for people's legs, cops. Just don't do that.
I mean, this is you've got to accept if you've got an armed police force, when they shoot, they are going to kill when they hit. I remember in Sydney, do you remember in the 90s, there was a French tourist who was towards the end of a big night on psychotic drugs at Bondi Beach at dawn, waving a knife around, surrounded by New South Wales cops who shot him dead. Yeah. And there was a lot of outrage about, really understandable outrage, because this was one tourist off his face, standing on the beach with a knife. Why did he have to die? And I remember at the time, people were saying, why weren't they shooting the knife out of his hand? Why weren't they shooting his legs? And the police, I distinctly remember the police commissioner saying, mate, that's cowboys and Indians stuff. You aim for the biggest target.
Yeah, because if you miss, you're going to shoot someone else.
Armed police, if they're going to shoot, they are going to,
But let's leave Biden aside. I just wanted to throw that in there. Let's go through some of the solutions that other people are proposing other than Joe Biden.
Yes. I don't know why we started with Biden.
Just because I find it funny. The leading solution on the left at the moment is one which I hadn't heard about until a couple of weeks ago. But you've studied up on it for us.
I have.
So I want you to tell us about defunding the police. Now, I presume defunding the police doesn't mean zero police, because that would be...
No.
We've seen what zero police is like during some of the looting, and it's not very nice. So why don't you tell us about what they mean?
Defunding the police is not only... it's something that has actually been done in some places where there has been significant defunding of police. Part of the context of this is... So the Minneapolis police, they use up 36% of the city's budget.
Yeah.
There are a lot of police in a lot of cities where the city is cash-strapped in every respect, but the police are obviously very, very well supplied. Part of that is because of how cheaply they can get ex-military gear, but also that just, a lot of money is poured into police budgets, which contributes to the militarization of it. And so it's a very simple principle. Rather than spending more and more to make police look like an occupying force, why not spend more on the kinds of municipal services which might actually get to the roots of crime and disorder in the first place?
Are we talking about spending less on prisons and stuff, or just like the exotic policing?
Certainly, I would probably anybody who's advocating defunding the police is also advocating really significant prison reform.
Because I'm into criminal justice reform, as we know.
Yes,
but the first realistic problem that confronts anyone who cares about criminal justice reform, which I do, is it doesn't take very long before you're releasing violent criminals. It's like there are many more of them than you think. But people say, oh, drugs. Yeah, okay, let's get rid of all the drugs. There's still, especially in state prisons, they are overwhelmingly violent criminals in state prisons. It doesn't take long before you're going, okay, are we releasing this guy who committed an assault or this guy who committed an assault? And while you may be of the view that that's fine, and to be honest, I am. I think Americans jail people for too long.
Yeah.
I imagine American people might not necessarily be such a fan of that.
Well, here are some abolitionist arguments about both police and prisons. And if you want to do some reading on this, Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, about the prison system and the carceral state. She's not explicitly advocating abolitionist solutions there, but she said in subsequent interviews that to her, abolitionism as a program is, yes, you've got to have the capacity to remove certain people from society, but it shouldn't look anything like it does now. A book, the very sort of immediate book, which this afternoon I got it for free in ebook form off the Verso website, is Alex Vitale's book, The End of Policing. Now, what abolitionists argue is, yes, you do have to have some capacity to respond to these issues, but it is something that should look completely different. And what they argue is every problem that police and prisons are supposedly responding to, police and prisons are making it worse. Just starting with the problem of violence, right? We have seen this week the way that a violent police response escalates violence in all these ways.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say the number because I was vague before.
Yes.
In state prisons, 713,000 of 1.2 million prisoners are violent.
Okay.
So anyway,
there you
keep
go.
going. Yeah.
But I mean, this is one of the things that they would, because the response is also like, well, you have to have some way of dealing with violent crime and sexual assault. What abolitionists say is, look, prison is the worst site of sexual assault.
Yes.
Anywhere, and the worst site of violence anywhere, right? So certainly the way that these things are currently structured, abolitionists argue they're actually making things worse. Okay, a second major argument is, which is something that you've hinted at, which is throughout history, there have been instances of dramatic expansion and contraction of police powers. And that's all to do with what is criminalised. Yeah. Right? So, prohibition of alcohol dramatically criminalised a whole lot of activities.
Drugs.
Massively increased policing. Yeah. And what they would say now is, so much policing is around things that don't need to be criminalised. Drugs, sex work, homelessness.
Yeah.
If you did not deal with those things as a police as a crime problem, as a law and order problem, there would be significantly more effective ways of dealing with it. And that would just involve a significant reduction of what police or whatever you put in its place actually have to do. So in terms of because, it is a very difficult thing to think about, this concept of abolition, that the way that abolitionists want you to start thinking about is, what could actually just be taken out of the hands of a police response in the first place?
I feel like the way to do it would be to just do it. What you were just saying, not to talk about abolition, not to talk about defund, because that stuff scares people. I mean, you look at the polls. I got the poll here from YouGov from a week ago, asked whether they would back cuts in funding for police departments. 16% said yes. That's 16% Democrats, 15% Republicans, 17% Independents. So it's right across the board. 65% said no. Black people were 33% in favour. An interesting one, just quickly before you jump in again. This is from 2015, so this might be out of date now. But people who were fairly treated by the police were less likely to say that they wanted a bigger police presence than people who were unfairly treated by the police, which is interesting, especially black people. You had nationally 21% of people who were treated fairly by police, one of the bigger presence, 31% who were treated unfairly by police, one of the bigger police presence. Black people, 33% who are treated fairly by police, one of the bigger police presence. 44% who were treated unfairly wanted a bigger police presence. So there's interesting assumptions that you have to try and counteract.
Yes.
And I reckon the smartest thing is to not counteract them. Just make the reforms.
Well, this is the thing. And the abolitionist movement, it's an activist program. It's not a debating society. It's an activist program led largely by African-American women that starts with very concrete steps around people in communities. How do they solve problems without involving the police? That's a huge part of the program. It's just not involving the police in things that they don't need to be involved in. This week, so Hakeem Jefferson, who I think I mentioned him last week, African-American political scientist at Stanford. He's been doing a lot of work this week around these issues. And in a forum that he was participating in, when this question came up, well, what would a world with police without police look like? What would it look like without police? And as he pointed out, it would look like a white neighborhood. Right? The thing about a world without police is what a lot of abolitionists want is that situation where you don't just have the police roaming around everywhere, sort of presumptively treating people as criminals, waiting for stuff to happen, treating every homeless person as a potential criminal, getting involved in problems and often making them. What they want is the normal situation that most white people are used to, which is, yes, you don't actually encounter police very often in your lives.
It's interesting because I was going to come to it later, but I might as well come to it now. There's a counteracting theory, which is the direct opposite of that, which is hotspot policing, which is to say almost all crime occurs in just a few blocks in every city. Hang on, I'll get the actual stat here.
Yeah.
It's I've got it just coming up down here. It's that but it's not about just leaning on people with just moving all your cops into the same 3 blocks, but also your social
not the Amsterdam model.
Not the Amsterdam, but also moving your social services there as well.
Right. Yes.
So you say, okay, these are the high stakes people.
Yeah.
If you don't treat them well, they're gonna be largely criminals. If you do treat them well, you can solve all your crime problems full stop.
Yes.
And so you move your social services there. You give them options, geez, I wish I could find this stat.
By the way, so one common abolitionist sort of refrain is most things that police do, a social worker could do better. It's a controversial claim, but that's a central sort of abolitionist
3 to 5% of city blocks account for 50 to 75% of all shootings and killings in America, with 1% of a city's population responsible for 50 to 60% of all homicides.
Okay,
so that's a theory. But that's the opposite of what you're talking about.
Something else I want to talk about. This is just getting away from abolitionism.
And just to finish, apparently Boston did that in the 90s quite successically, but that's the only place that's tried it.
Right.
Anyway,
okay. So getting away from abolitionism, a sort of another alternative viewpoint, which sees much more of a role for police, but in a very different way. So you might have heard of the broken windows theory of policing. The original essay, if you want to look it up, was from 1982 in The Atlantic. It was by James Q. Wilson. And I mean, generally abolitionists hate this because it turns crime into a moral problem. And it basically says the police have to go out and be morally vigilant, police deviant behaviour. And then, of course, broken windows morphed into zero tolerance, which was the most overrated kind of policing method. Now, but another perspective on broken windows, I got it a couple of years ago in 2018 from David Kennedy, who's at the John Jay College of Justice in New York, works a lot in violence prevention, and he claims that broken windows is actually, it mutated into something quite unrecognizable from what it originally was in practice. He says in practice, it was actually something quite different. In practice, it was the sort of principle that you're talking about, police recognizing that actually in any community, it's only a few people who are responsible for violence. And that the core of good police work was actually working out who those people were and intervening in ways before violence happened. under this principle, an arrest is a failure, right? Because if you've got to arrest someone, that means you've allowed something to happen. And he was talking about he gave a talk at University of Sydney Law School, which I was chairing. He talked about there are all kinds of other intervention. If you are actually in tune with the community, there are all kinds of other interventions that are available before you actually get to the stage of arresting someone in the wake of a violent incident. So that's another perspective on it. A lot of abolitionists argue that community policing as a principle has not worked because it's based on, a lot of it is based on community meetings, and those meetings tend to be dominated by landlords and retirees
and authors who ask questions.
Without a lot of input from
writers' festivals.
Without a lot of input from marginalised people who are actually going to be at the sharp end of policing. By the way, when you read Alex Vitale's book, the entire first chapter is just, this is why reform doesn't work.
Is this going in the book club? Oh, great.
Yeah, he's already got it. By the way, with the mega book list now, can you please take Sean McFart's New Rules of War off there? First of all, I didn't recommend it. Second, you misspelled his name as McFate, which sounds really cool. No, his name is McFart. Right.
I'm pretty sure it's spelt that way. We pinched off the internet.
It's
Internet's
McFart.
never wrong.
MCFARTE.
Oh,
anyway,
okay.
so Alex Vitale, one of the abolitionist arguments is, because there are so many arguments for police reform being made, is just none of these work, right? Body cameras didn't work. Increased training, that doesn't work. It's the training that's the problem in the first place. Increased diversity in the police force. Well, the thing about structural racism is it's not just about white cops who don't like blacks beating blacks up. It's also about black cops working under a lot of the same assumptions.
That's a real rap cliche, isn't it? That the black cops are the worst cops.
It is, yes, yeah. This isn't some new discovery. As you say, it's a rap cliche, but it is certainly cities which have a lot more African Americans in the police force, they have the same problems. So it's not like just increasing the number of black cops is going to solve the problem. And so Vitale really systematically goes through all of these different solutions and basically says they're not solutions at all. Can you talk now? Because I've got a text plumber who is fixing the water inlet.
Dave, I can talk. Okay, yes. I'll start talk about some of the solutions that have just been trashed. Okay, when we talk about, Dave referred to culture, changing the culture, and there's a few ideas out there that people talk about. One is a very simple one, which I'm not sure. I mean, this is probably worth trying, but I'm not sure it'll make the huge difference, which is at the moment, it's a duty for officers to intervene when they witness a fellow officer engaged in unreasonable force. Of it now, you might go, well, what just happened with George Floyd?
Have they been told that it's their duty to join in?
Well, see, the word there is duty.
Right.
And what people are saying is they should make it a statutory requirement. So you go to jail if you don't do it. There's a big difference between a duty, which you fail, and you broke the law if you didn't intervene when they were using excessive force. So that's one change, which a lot of people suggest, and I think that's not a bad idea. By the way, if I call him Floyd George, I keep on calling him Floyd George. I did it like 3 times today on the show. We have to keep on retaping. I know why. You know why it is?
Because of Lloyd George?
No, because of Boy George. That's why. It doesn't have much in common with Boy George, but in my head,
you should get his name right.
It's like, George Floyd.
Yeah.
I'm just excuse me if I do say Floyd George. But another thing about culture, which a lot of people talk about, is guardian culture versus warrior culture. This is something that gets discussed a lot recently. And it's very popular, the idea of guardian culture. 88% in the recent YouGov poll said they supported training officers to de-escalate conflicts and avoid using force. And so some examples of what I'm talking about, like I read a bit about this guardian mindset, which is like emphasize communication over command, cooperation over compliance, and in the use of force context, it emphasizes restraint over control and stability over the action. Basically, you're not so much trying to just protect civilians from crime and violence, but also from indignity and humiliation. That's the idea, right? Yeah. Problem is, if your culture is a guardian culture, they don't want to hear about warrior mind. Sorry, if you got warrior culture, they don't want to hear about the guardian mindset. They think it's wussy. And the perfect example of that is Bob Kroll, who's the head of the Minnesota Police Union, who is, even as we speak, trying to get Chauvin not just off his charges, but back in the police force. He's actively trying to get the guy his job back. And you might be wondering why in hell anyone involved with police would want that guy back in the force. But this is what these people are like. Bob Kroll, he's had 20 internal affairs investigations against him, only 3 of which, by the way, were closed without. So only 3 of which, were closed with some kind of discipline. I don't know what it was, but he got off 17 of 20, which says something about the culture anyway. But these are some quotes from him. He says, talking about the guardian mindset, it's not in cops' nature. You train them to back away. It's just not. It's just not a natural thing. Where a lot of stress comes from is cops not having the ability to grab somebody and say, "No, step back. You're going to jail." He said that in his early days of training, the rule was to ask them nicely, to do something the first time, then give them a direct lawful order, and then if they refuse, you make them with force. That's how you get compliance. He said, these days, you ask them, you love them, you call, give them their space, give them their voice, and this is how he regards this stuff. Yeah. And even in we speak, in Minnesota, they tried to introduce guardian training there because they've got this socialist, this super lefty mayor who's new age and hates police violence and all the rest. He tried to introduce himself, and Bob Kroll made sure that the Minnesota Police Union offered them warrior training instead. It just went around them. They just ignored their own mayor, who's supposed to be their boss. Yeah. So that's an example of the mindset. So it's a big ask to change the culture. I mean, it's a multi-decade situation. Yeah. So, and that's even if it does work, which it may not.
This point about the power of police unions and police associations.
I'm going to get to them
in general. Okay, you're going to get to them.
We're getting to them. There are some simple things though as well. There's if we leave aside culture because that just seems a bit hard. Yeah. Just some simple things like San Diego and New York are both banning chokeholds. That seems like a sensible thing to do. I don't know why you'd need a chokehold. Yeah.
Although that rule tends to get widely ignored whenever it's implemented.
Sure. There are 2 things that Trump did, the Trump administration did, which I don't think were very good, which can be immediately reversed. One was he got rid of consent agreements, which was the Obama administration's attempt to basically pressure police administrations to reform themselves, essentially.
Yes.
And the other thing he did was he reversed the military gear thing, this is an ongoing thing, is military gear thing. I'll just explain that quickly. It's called the 1033 program that allows defense to sell secondhand military equipment to the police real cheap, right? If not for free, but real cheap. And the worst thing about this program, which a lot of people don't realize, is under this program, to get this cheap gear, you need to use it in a year or you have to give it back.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so you get these military helicopters and all the rest of it, and you got to find a reason to use it. And so it's almost forcing you.
Someone is running chickens too close to their back fence. I mean, I say that in jest, but there actually was there was this terrible trend in the 2000s of law enforcement agencies actually making reality shows about themselves. Like Detroit had one that was just terrible, that basically captured police committing a lot of felonies on camera and celebrating it. But the worst was, Steven Seagal.
Yes. What was that called? Hang on.
So Steven Seagal would ride around.
Lawman or something.
Yeah, with deputy sheriffs in Arizona. And there actually was there was an episode.
It was Lawman.
There was an episode where they raided someone who was involved in some sort of literally chicken-related offense. They actually rolled a tank in there to crush his illegal chicken coop.
When you say they roll a tank in there, are you sure that wasn't just Steven Seagal rolling in?
Yeah, good.
This is later years.
Good question. By the way, look up on YouTube Steven Seagal saying the words Vladimir Putin.
For anyone to think that Vladimir Putin...
It's
3 seasons.
3 seasons.
The Hand of God says there were 3 seasons. I should say it wasn't called Lawman. It was called Steven Seagal, a lawman. But anyway, yeah, that is quite funny. But anyway, yeah, now Brian Schatz, who's a Hawaiian senator, is just introducing an amendment right now to just get rid of the 1033 program once and for all, which I think sounds like a great idea. So that is a good reform. I'm not sure, once again, it's going to change everything, but just little bits and pieces as you go. Val Demings, who is a potential vice president at the moment, she wrote an op-ed recently where she basically, her message was, you get what you pay for. We don't pay cops enough. We attract a poor quality cop. And
guys who didn't have the discipline to make it as assistant high school wrestling coaches,
but did have the discipline to make it onto Steven Seagal lawman, which is the important bit. Anyway, I would suggest that she's probably right.
Yeah.
You probably do need to pay cops more, but I reckon let's institute some of the other reforms first.
I would say so, yes.
Let's not pay Bob Kroll more.
Yeah.
We've already talked about hotspot policing. Okay. I want to, rather than the small ball stuff, I want to talk about accountability, because before you reform,
right,
even before we get to reforming bits and pieces, the biggest problem, as far as I can see, is that there is no incentive for cops to not commit crimes because they don't get held accountable. And there's 2 different kinds of civil accountability that are failing, as far as I can see. The first of which is civil accountability, and then there's criminal accountability.
Okay.
So let's start with civil accountability. Now, the thing which a lot of libertarians talk about, so this is why I started with it first, is qualified immunity, right? Which is something which I don't think a lot of people are aware of.
You mentioned it before, very, very recently on the show, though.
Yeah, but I'm going to go in more detail now. Basically, qualified immunity is the principle. This is from the 1970s. It was created by the court, not by the legislature. Okay, it was created by the Supreme Court. Yeah. And the idea is this is an immunity for all conduct that the police don't know for a fact is already legal, or already illegal.
Right.
If they don't know for a fact it's already illegal, they get away with it the first time. The idea being police can't be second-guessing themselves all the time going, oh, am I allowed to do this? Am I not allowed to do this? The first time someone does it, the idea of qualified immunity is they get away with it. The court says, next time, that's bad. You're going to jail next time.
Yes,
and then the police don't do that. But that's not how it's evolved.
No.
In reality, what's happened is the court hasn't even issued rulings anymore. They just say, sorry, there's no precedent for that. You get away with it.
Yeah.
And that has become more and more absurd over time. We've got to the situation now where I've got some examples here where a cop picked up a 5-foot-tall, unarmed woman clad only in a bathing suit and drove her head first into the ground, knocking her unconscious and breaking her collarbone. There was no precise analogy in the court record of that.
Right.
Someone hadn't done exactly that before, so immune.
Okay.
So that's the theory of qualified immunity. And at the moment, lots of people, like Justin Amash has already introduced a bill to try and get rid of it. The Supreme Court right now is hearing cases about it. Yeah. And by the way, Clarence Thomas and wise Latina, what's her name?
Sonia Sotomayor.
Sonia Sotomayor, thank you. They're both against it.
Right.
So they may get rid of it, the Supreme Court. We'll see. But it's a big deal at the moment because basically police are, and it's not just police that have this, by the way. All public servants have qualified immunity. It's just that most public servants don't have guns.
Most public servants aren't. What can I do that might be illegal?
Yeah, and they're not smashing people and killing people.
No.
So I don't think the arts department or whatever is killing people. So
the garbage men are generally not killing people.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. So so there's that. But the worst thing about the situation is even if somehow you get a lawsuit. Oh, because that's the other thing. With qualified immunity hanging over you, why would you even undergo a lawsuit in the first place? You know that they're going to appeal you all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
That's going to take 2 or 3 years. That will cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Exactly,
and
yes.
you'll probably lose.
Yes.
So people don't even undergo lawsuits anymore
Yeah.
because they go, what's the point? But if somehow you undergo a lawsuit and you win, most of these cops have indemnity anyway.
Right.
The government pays for their fines.
Yes,
And I've got a number here for you. In 2014, Joanna Schwartz found in a study for UCLA found that the government paid approximately 99.98% of the dollars that plaintiffs recovered in lawsuits alleging civil rights violations by law
that sounds right.
enforcement.
Yeah.
So that's a problem too. So there's no accountability whatsoever as far as civil law goes.
This is why I saw a proposal, a very angry proposal this week, that these payments have to start coming out of police pension funds.
Well, I'm not sure I'd go that far.
No, I
but,
don't agree with that.
Yeah, but I don't think they should be coming. I think at the very least the police department itself should feel some pain,
Right.
if its employees
Yes.
constantly being sued for brutality.
Yes.
Like there's got to be some incentives.
Yes.
That's all I'm saying.
Okay,
at the
so
moment.
more
Yeah.
accountability
Yeah.
mechanisms then.
Yeah. So I would say there are 2 accountability mechanisms right there you can introduce. Criminal accountability is another thing altogether.
It is.
Because since 2005, there have been 100 officers who have been charged with homicide for using deadly force in the line of duty,
Yep.
and only 35 convictions out of that 100.
Yep.
And out of those 35 convictions, almost all of them were manslaughter or negligent homicide.
Right.
Very, very few murders. And we
yeah.
may be about to see another one,
Yes.
which we'll get to.
By the way, though, that's 35 more than Australia has ever had over the course of more than 400 deaths of Indigenous people in custody since the 1987 Royal Commission into Black Deaths in Custody.
That is a good addition. That's why he's a professor.
No, there's nothing good about it, but it's just
but
always worth
You were good.
not using
stats not
the
good.
US as an excuse for complacency.
Yeah,
Yes.
no,
But
fair
okay, so there have been 35 convictions.
Yeah. So there are a couple of obvious things. By the way, jump in at any point in time. I've teed up all my list here, but you can jump in
Okay.
anytime you like. Jump in.
Right, yeah. Okay. So I think, and you've hinted at this very strongly already a few times,
Yeah.
the problem with any accountability mechanism that involves the criminal justice system itself, which is the closeness of the relationship between
Yes.
police and prosecutors
Yes.
and police and courts in general.
And investigators as well.
And investigators. And, and even if it goes to, say, trial by jury, jurors tend to be very, very well, from what I've read, I'm speaking as someone with no legal or criminological background here, but from what I've read, jurors tend to be quite well, certainly better disposed towards police than they are towards other groups, which you can imagine why. You're sitting in a courthouse, you're in the place of law. You've been taught from, as soon as you were conscious of the law, that police are the ones who, protect you. Do you know how many TV shows and movies there are glorifying the police? Because basically every TV show and movie about the police is painting them in a positive light. Well, I actually don't know how many there are, but it's been in the thousands.
There was NYPD Blue, had Dennis Franz. Dennis Franz, I didn't think he was very glamorous.
I once
apart
looked
from
up
that-
on Wikipedia. There is a Wikipedia page.
He was nude once. That wasn't
TV
glamorous.
shows about the New York Police Department. It's more than 40 about the NYPD alone. And they're all, all putting them in a very positive. Even Brooklyn Nine-Nine. That's not exactly painting cops in a bad light.
Not at all. Quite the
Now,
opposite.
I'm not saying that we should be making TV shows,
Trashing the
saying
cops.
that cops are failed
or racist and
high
corrupt.
school assistant wrestling coaches. But it's just to make a point. It is so deeply culturally ingrained,
Yeah, it is.
this glorification of this particular profession.
I got one for you. Payback, Mel Gibson. Cops were dirty there. There you go. That's one.
Well, yeah, you depart Serpico. Remember that movie from 1997, Copland?
yeah.
Yeah.
So we got 3.
But nearly every movie that's about dirty cops, perhaps Serpico's a bit of an exception. A good cop one good cop triumphs in the end.
Well, the triumph in the triumph in Payback was not only the criminal, but also it was Mel Gibson. So you can't get much worse than that.
Yeah, maybe. But you know what the best cop show ever made in any country was? It was actually here. And I'm not talking about Funky Squad, which goes down as probably working dog's least successful venture. No, Blue Murder.
Oh, yeah. I never saw that.
Yeah. Oh, you've got to see it. Yeah. So
Probably good
Blue Murder, which had Richard Roxburgh as Roger Rogerson.
Yeah.
And
He's not a good guy.
No, he's not a good. Tony Martin, not the funny Tony Martin.
No,
the other Tony Martin as Nettie Smith.
Yeah.
That was a fantastic, unvarnished view of bad policing. Yeah. But anyway, we're getting a little bit off topic.
We are. Let me get back on topic by saying, okay, if you can't sue them and you can't throw them in jail,
yep.
At the very least, you need to get them fired.
Yes.
All right? If they've murdered someone, it's a good idea to get them fired. And here's another thing which people don't understand. You get 2 bites of the apple if you're a cop, right? The first bite is whether it's civil court
bites of the donut.
whether it's civil court or criminal court or whatever, the first time, right? And then you'll get the sack or whatever.
Yep.
Then you get arbitration.
Right.
And arbitration can reverse whatever happened the first time, right?
Yep.
And arbitration is based on precedent. So that if you used to have lax standards, they continue to be the standards from that point forth. It's very difficult to change the standards of arbitration, right? Yeah. And so just to give you examples of how this works, I'll give you one example is Brian Miller was a sheriff's deputy from Broward County. I don't know if you remember the name. He was
Broward County, in
Broward,
Florida.
Broward County. You remember?
I'm never going to forget Broward County.
But you might not remember Brian Miller. He was the sheriff's deputy who was cowering behind a cop car while the shooting was happening.
No.
In Florida, the school shooting, and he took 10 minutes to radio for help.
Right.
And he got for his failure to act, to do anything, he was fired.
Yeah.
Last month, you might not have heard, he was not only reinstated but given back his full pay.
Jesus.
So that's one example through arbitration. I'll give you another example.
By the way, about that shooting, and I want to come back to shooting in a second, Dave Cullen's book, Parkland, which is the second book that he's written about school shootings. The first was Columbine. Fantastic book about how the school system and policing and society in general all interacts with each other.
Is that on the book list?
That's a recommendation.
Okay.
Every book I mention is on the book list, apart from anything by Sean McFart.
Okay. I'll give you another example. A guy called Total. In 2014, he handcuffed a dude, and he allegedly what he did was he began to question him. Yep. And this guy's handcuffed, and during the questioning, Tao threw him on the ground and began hitting him. While he was face down on the ground and handcuffed, Tao pulled his head up, grabbing the back of his sweatshirt, and the other officer kicked him in the mouth. After the assault, the 2 officers took this guy Ferguson to a hospital for medical treatment. Mm-hmm. And they kept him the whole time in a t-shirt and underpants before dropping off in jail in his t-shirt and underpants. After assaulting him, he was bleeding everywhere and broke his teeth. He faced discipline. Top Tao, who we know what he got up to recently, and he said that he only began punching the guy after the guy's hands slipped out of his handcuffs. Quote, at some point, one of his arms, I believe it was the left arm, pops out of the handcuffs and he tries to pull away. And he puts his hands on me and tries to give me a stiff arm in a way to try and get me off him. After at this point, he's actively resisting arrest, so I had no choice but to punch him. So that's why I punched him in the face. So there you go. Yeah. And after arbitration, the case was settled out of court for $25,000, and then through arbitration he got off that anyway. So the arbitration allows people to stay on the streets. Right. And so I don't know exactly how legislatively what you do with that, because once again, arbitration applies to everyone. It's not just for the cops.
No, of course.
But it's an issue, and the police unions are big on using arbitration to get people back on the streets. Yeah. And by the way, it is exactly through arbitration that Kroll plans to get Chauvin back.
It's a really unfortunate state of affairs that law enforcement unions seem to be by far the most effective unions in the United States.
It is, yeah.
Let's talk about law enforcement unions.
Yeah, let's do that. But I'll just give you the stats just before we do that. arbitrators ruled in favour of terminated law enforcement and correction officers. Now, just think how hard it is to get them terminated, law enforcement and correction officers. 46% of the time.
Right.
These people are found guilty by the extremely difficult process to find them guilty. 46% of the time back in the job through arbitration.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's arbitration. Okay. All right. Let's talk police unions.
Yeah.
I'm ready to go. I've got my union shirt on. Let's go.
So police unions are very politically powerful in the United States at all levels of government. Trump often touts his support from police unions and various law enforcement unions. Fair to say law enforcement unions tend to be well to the right of just about any other union in America. Also, it's not just that there are police unions out there. There are all kinds of sort of satellite organizations that are there basically to raise money to defend cops when they get in trouble. And if you want an idea of the ubiquity of these things, I remember when I first got to Michigan, I got a landline put in. And I mean, that was just a mistake in itself because immediately your phone number is sold to like every organization out there that is trying to get money. So over the course of one night, I got calls from Mothers Against Drink Driving. I got calls from 2 separate Detroit newspapers asking if I wanted a subscription. Actually did get a subscription to the Detroit Free Press.
Don't encourage them.
Very good newspaper. Thanks, guys.
No.
But there was one from, it was, the Michigan Fraternal Order of Officers, I think is what it was called. And they said, if you give us a donation, we'll send you a decal for your car. And in the guy's exact words, now we're not saying it'll bounce radar or anything, but it'll just let our boys out there know that you're looking after them so that we can look after you.
Wow.
Yeah. So it really is, one of the major insights of historical sociology about the development of the state is the claim that the state itself, you'd love this as a libertarian, the state is basically a protection racket.
Yeah.
The state is like the dominant protection racket in any area. Mansur Olson called this the stationery bandit theory of the state. It's basically the gang that decides that rather than just roaming around robbing people, hey, it's actually a lot more effective to stay in one place and charge everyone else protection money. Now, that is not normally how we like to think about the state, but when you get this call from the Michigan Fraternal Officer of Police basically saying, hey, send us $20 and we'll do our job extra well. Well, you can speed through as many stoplights as you want, but buddy, the implication was if you don't have that sticker on there,
Okay, so leaving aside the shakedown nature of police unions. Yes.
Yeah, and not just unions, but all of these satellite associations as well, which in themselves, they're not just politically powerful, they're also PR machines. Like anytime something goes wrong, you'll immediately see some article by someone from some sergeant's benevolent union who might not even actually be a police officer, but it's someone whose job as part of this association is basically just to spin.
The frustrating thing about them is you said that they might be the most effective, well, they're definitely the most effective unions, but the problem is they use their effectiveness not for the purposes of unionism. They don't use their effectiveness to increase wages or to improve conditions.
No, which is still shit.
Yeah, they use their effectiveness to mess around with disciplinary processes and stuff.
That is absolutely what they use.
Which is exactly what they... My number one reform would be to ban them from negotiating disciplinary processes. Because I don't know why a union needs to do that, to be honest.
No.
Like, why has a union got to negotiate for someone who's been thrown off for disciplinary purposes?
I don't know. Thinking about that role that unions play in other workplaces, I wouldn't like to see that weakened. But I certainly wouldn't like to see it banned. But there is a real problem.
I'll tell you what you do. You say when violence is involved, they can't negotiate discipline. So that way, that's only going to apply to the cops.
Okay, let's stop making industrial relations policy for another country on the fly.
Okay, but a reasonable point, Dave. But I was just going to say, there's research on this now this is early research, admittedly.
Yeah.
This guy's emphasized it's early, but nevertheless, what this guy's found.
This guy, does he have a name?
His name is Rob Gillizo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What he's found is that looking at collective bargaining rights for police officers between the 1950s and the 1980s, when a lot of these processes occurred,
Yep.
that the introduction of access to collective bargaining drove a modest decline in police employment. An increase in compensation.
Yep.
Had no meaningful impacts on total crime or violent crime or property crime or officers killed in the line of duty. But what it had a big impact on is police killings of civilians over the medium to long run. And an overwhelming majority of those were non-white. Right. So, and that is obviously related to discipline. And I'll give you an example, because these guys, they mess with contracts. That's the primary thing they do. They negotiate these contracts, these contract provisions. Reuters studied 82 different cities' contracts, and what they found, 46 of those contracts called for departments to erase disciplinary records, sometimes after 6 months, up to 3 years. So if you, say, had murdered someone and you had your job, you kept your job for whatever reason, after 4 years, your record is erased. So
wow.
So you can't be fired for multiple
murders.
For multiple murders, because they don't even know the first murder occurred.
Wow.
So that's an interesting one. So that's in the majority of the cities that Reuters.
So you could actually
studied.
be a serial killer, and as long as you spaced the killings
Yes.
at reasonable intervals. Yes.
See, that would make a good TV show. They should make that call.
Every new episode is 4 years later after the last one.
39 of the 82 cities in their contracts allowed officers accused of misconduct to access the entire investigative file, including witness statements, GPS readouts, photos, videos, and notes from the internal investigation before they were interrogated. That's interesting.
Yep.
17 cities' contracts set time limits for citizens to file complaints about police officers, sometimes as short as 30 days. 9 cities restricted anonymous complaints from being investigated.
Wow.
And, you want your complaint to be anonymous if you're complaining against police, especially dirty police.
You do, yes.
So that gives you an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like it's these contracts that this is how the police union really has an effect, which is the reason why I'm saying I don't think they should be allowed to, but we won't negotiate on behalf of a different country industrial relations, which neither of us know anything about. But that's for me is the biggest issue for police unions, the contracts.
Yes.
Do you have anything else to add about police unions?
No.
No? Okay. All right.
Oh, yeah, but I do have one more thing to add about policing. Then I think that we've got to move on.
Yeah. Okay.
It's very hard to see any meaningful change coming about while the United States remains a heavily armed society. The police do have a very dangerous job in the United States, and that is because of the prevalence of firearms. This is not to say that police brutality is a uniquely American thing. It's certainly not. We've seen significant and frightening evidence of it here in New South Wales this week. But part of the problem in terms of the lethality of it in the US case, where, in a given year, you can expect more than 1,000 people to die at the hands of the police in various circumstances, is because it is a heavily armed society. And all of these problems we've been talking about, the warrior response, the shoot first and ask questions later. Are you fucking kidding? We're not shooting at someone's leg. We're shooting at their heart. That's how you behave in a heavily armed society. So until American society is broadly disarmed to a large extent, and I have no idea what could actually bring that about.
Yeah.
However much we talk about potential solutions, in the end, police have to actually be willing to embrace those kinds of solutions, and they're not going to be while they face a heavily armed society.
You're very right about that. I don't have the study in front of me because
Yes.
I didn't know you were going to say that, but
Yeah.
I happen to remember that when it comes to guns, a lot of the things which people think are the case,
Yeah.
gun correlations, are not actually the case.
Right, yeah.
But one thing that is absolutely the case is more guns in a state
Yes.
means more officer shootings.
Yes.
There is a direct correlation between, and when I say officer shootings, I mean officers shooting people.
Yes. Yeah.
Because and you can see exactly how that would happen.
Yeah.
When there's more guns around, they're more on edge. They're more likely to use their own guns.
Yes.
And they're probably more in more threatening situations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There you go. Okay, you're right. Let's move on. Stat nugget. Okay. I'm going to develop that.
What's? Yeah, I think that one needs a bit of work. Okay,
There
what's
are-
our stat nugget?
There are 1,954 miles on the border between America and Mexico, Dr.
Yes.
Dave. There is about 700 miles of border wall so far. I want you to guess for me how many miles of new wall, not replacement wall,
Right.
new wall in total has been built by the Trump administration.
It's single digits.
Ooh, close, but not quite. 16 miles.
16 miles.
16 miles. They have built 194 miles of wall in total, but 178 miles was replacement wall for wall that
Right.
already existed. 16 miles of new wall. Now, not all that 1,954 miles needs to be covered, of course,
No.
because there's rivers, there's mountains, there's all the rest of
Yes.
it. But Trump was very, very clear when he was getting elected that he was he was getting elected as well. When he was getting elected, he was very clear that he was going to cover that entire 1,954 miles from sea to
very
shining
clear
sea.
about that.
But anyway, so that's your start nugget. Hey, get.
I think he has, like, at some point mentioned that he now understands that you don't need to build a wall
He has.
over the Rio Grande, but
he has.
he's still got
He has.
major ambitions.
It's got a long way to go.
Yeah.
And while we're at the stat nugget, I've got a fact nugget.
Fact nugget.
No, this- Van Jones, bald guy on CNN.
No, Van Jones.
Do you know who he was married to until last year?
No.
This is very random, but it's just amazing.
Who?
Jimmy Carter's niece. He was married to her for like 12 years. How did I miss that? Anyway.
I don't know if that is as amazing as you think it is.
Come on. Van Jones and Jimmy Carter. That's so random. Jimmy Carter's niece. Anyway. Let's move on to let's do one of your things. I'm going to come back to
Yeah.
let's talk polling. Let's go polling.
Yeah.
You want to talk about polling?
So, there, I don't know if it's just me, but there seems to have been a real shift in the last couple of weeks, both in the polls and in the way that they are being talked about. Do you remember, it must have been about 3 or 4 weeks ago, that I said, I'm only prepared to accept a consistent 8-point lead as, a safe lead for Biden.
Yes, I do remember.
Well,
that.
you know what the Real Clear Politics average is? Now, this is Real Clear Politics, which when you compare Real Clear Politics and 538.com, both of them do polling averages. Real Clear Politics usually a bit more generous to the right. They give Biden an 8.5% average lead over Trump. There are some polls suggesting at the national level that it's bigger than that. Some suggesting smaller as well, but
Hillary was like, what, 2, 3? At this
well,
point in time?
okay. Yes, at this point, this far out, Hillary was 1.5
There you go.
over Trump.
Yeah.
Obama was 1.5 over Romney. Obama was 1.5 over McCain. Biden is 8.5.
And let's not forget, I'm not sure if I said this on this podcast. I definitely said this on the TV show.
Yes.
That Biden enjoys the steadiest lead in polling history.
Yeah.
That 95% of his results
Yes.
are within 6 points of the average.
Right, yeah.
That has never happened before.
Yeah. Now, obviously, there is a long time
Yes.
to go. Yeah. Clearly, Trump thinks he's got all kinds of hopes about the economy recovering and everything magically getting better. But clearly what Trump thinks will change things is when he's in direct combat with Biden.
Yeah.
I don't know if that will. And, we've talked before about, yes, Biden is definitely benefiting from invisibility and inaudibility. When Trump So Trump seems to have settled on Sleepy Joe as the nickname for him. That's not even an effective nickname.
No, it's not.
It's not an effective nickname for
kinda
someone who
cute.
gets more popular the less they're seen or heard. It's not an
Yes.
effective nickname for someone who people would just like to be in bed.
That's a dwarf.
All the
People love
time.
the dwarves.
Yeah, yeah. And sleepy, that's kind of an endearing trait of an old person. Meanwhile, people are looking at Trump and saying, doctors do claim that there are health benefits to sleeping. Something that applies to you too, Chad. Like maybe not having a president who's tweeting the words law and order at 1 o'clock in the morning
Time well spent, I say.
might be a refreshing change. So, and you know, also, I think if you were the Republican campaign, you would be extremely worried about how easily Biden was able to shrug off Tara Reid.
Yeah.
And I mean, so today, I don't know if you saw, Biden gave this interview, which clearly people are already trying to hype into his version of the deplorables thing. So
Did he shoot someone in the leg?
no, I can't remember who he was talking to. But he said, you know, most Americans are decent people. There are maybe 10 to 15% of Americans who aren't very good people. I love, like, the fact that he was so specific about the number of Americans who he doesn't think are very good people. Now, immediately, so the New York Times headline was, Biden says 10 to 15% of Americans not very good people. Now, I don't think this is going to take off in the same way that deplorables did, because deplorable, that's kind of a cool thing to call yourself, right? No, I don't think people are going to be walking around at the Republican convention with T-shirts saying like,
Not very good person.
Not very good.
Don Cheadle too.
It was a chat with Don Cheadle. Yeah, not very good people. Or maybe they can have a not very good people badge to put on their You Ain't Black T-shirt. God, that's going to be a great sight when we've got all of these old white people wearing You Ain't Black T. I mean, the thing is, it's a point you've made before about him being Trump's Trump.
Yeah.
Nothing is sticking to him.
Absolutely not. And I was going to say was that on
Yeah.
that deplorable thing, on the
Yeah,
not
yeah.
very good people thing, that is never going to stick, because apart from the fact that, as you said, it's not very catchy, but on top of that,
Yeah.
it doesn't play into a pre-existing cliche.
No, it doesn't.
Like the
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
about Joe Biden is not that he looks down on you.
No.
The thing about Joe Biden is that he's senile.
Yeah.
and people don't care.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
don't care that he's senile.
Yeah.
I cited the stat on the show
Yeah,
today,
yeah,
which
yeah.
I'll cite here as well, because I can't believe this.
Yeah.
This to me, if I was Donald Trump, I'd just throw up my hands and go, ah!
Yeah, yeah.
Which is, according to a Washington Post poll,
Yeah, yeah.
they did characteristic
Yeah.
polling, right?
Yeah.
Has the mental sharpness to serve effectively as president. Joe Biden, 51 to 43.
Wow.
Donald Trump, 46 to 52. Donald
dear.
Trump has not shut up about
dear.
Joe Biden being senile for the last 6 months.
Wow.
And they still saying it's more of a problem for Trump than for
Yeah,
Biden.
he's
It's
in
not
trouble.
working. It's just
No.
not working.
No. And for anyone who thinks that senility is a serious obstacle to, getting president.
Reagan.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan. Or Sir Joe Biokla Peterson.
And to be fair,
Yeah.
to be fair, I actually don't have a problem with that either. I actually don't think it should be. I really don't. Like in that, okay, full senility, that's a problem. but I was having this argument with my dad because I told you my super right wing dad. So-
Yeah.
And my dad was making the same case about Biden. He's going, oh, he's lost it. He's over the hill. And I was going, well, hang on. You're 75. You're a bit slower than you used to be, aren't you? He said, well, yeah. And I said, well, do you think you've lost your judgment? And he said, well, no. And I said,
Is that him texting you now?
yeah, you talking about me on a podcast
Yeah,
again?
yeah.
And this is the thing I think people realize is there's a difference
yeah.
between being slower and less fluent
Yeah.
and kind of making a fool of yourself
Yes.
and having completely lost your judgment.
Yes.
And I don't think there's any evidence that Joe Biden has completely lost his judgment. And I don't think people care until you get to that point.
Right.
You can make a complete ass of yourself.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's cute.
Yes.
People laugh about that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's why I think that it's not necessarily a problem if you're over the hill and you're
Yes.
you're what's the word, a dotard.
Yeah.
As long as you're not fully
Yes.
lost it. But anyway, that's my theory.
Well,
Keep
anyway,
going.
but so part of the significance of these polling, and I mean, you can look this polling up yourself. It's not just bad national head-to-head polls.
No, it's state polls as well.
State polls. There was a poll showing Biden leading in Ohio, which at the start of the year, Democrats would not in their wildest dreams have thought that they could get Ohio back.
And he doesn't need that anyway. He just needs to win either Wisconsin or Arizona.
No, this is
That's
the
all
thing.
he
When
needs.
Republicans are putting money into defending Ohio, Arizona, and Iowa, they're in trouble. And Democrats I would like to think, have learnt their lessons from last time around about where they actually need to direct resources. We've talked before, Trump doesn't have the novelty value that he had. Trump is definitely in trouble. Okay, one of the implications of this is there's been a lot of talk this week about, okay, when are Republicans going to start breaking ranks? Will they start breaking ranks?
Wouldn't that be suicide if they did?
Well, I mean, this is the interesting thing. So Lisa Murkowski, who voted against Justice Kavanaugh getting confirmed, among other things. So after reading Mattis's interview in The Atlantic, she said that she wasn't sure whether she could actually support Trump in 2020.
But she's run as an independent.
Well, yeah, she got into the Senate after losing the Republican primary in 2010 by, getting a writing campaign, which is amazing given how many Alaskans she got to spell her name correctly.
Yes.
Yeah, so she's proven that she's got support bases, including among Alaska natives.
Yeah, I reckon her and Romney, you give them...
Yeah. Right.
You give them an exception.
It's not time to start getting excited about Republican defections yet in terms of who's making... Yeah, her, Romney, Ben Sass, Susan Collins. I mean, these are the people that you would expect to see wavering. Right. The question is... Are they now getting, has enough cover been given for broader defections? It does not appear to be the case yet. I'm not saying that it can't happen. I agree with the argument that now's a more opportune time than ever before if people do want to break ranks, but just we are not actually seeing it yet. Something analogous to this is people keep asking, is Trump's evangelical base cracking?
Yeah.
There is a little bit of leaking around the edges.
He lost 11 points amongst evangelical Christians in April, according to PRI.
Was that white evangelicals or evangelicals?
That was white evangelicals.
Right. Okay. That's bigger than everything. I was thinking more like it's gone down by about 5%, from about 82% to 77%.
And it was white Catholics. He'd lost 12 points as well.
Right. Yeah. That's understandable. Just so. Every now and then, in fact, with increasing frequency, you will see some prominent evangelical figure actually denounce him.
Pat Robertson this week.
Beware. Well, that was incredibly weird.
He said he wasn't cool.
It wasn't cool. Yeah. Yeah.
King of cool, Pat Robertson.
Did we talk about this on Wednesday?
No. But I talked about it on the show just now, so I probably shouldn't talk too much about it. But yes.
Yeah. It is very weird, because I'm pretty sure that Pat Robertson would have used to regard the word cool as a race mixing word that he wouldn't have wanted anything to do with. But most of the, Pat Robertson aside, most of the there's always a lot of excitement. Oh, look at this prominent evangelical denouncing Trump. They're nearly always someone who has some long pre-existing problem with Trump.
And there's a few of them.
Yeah. So there's basically any prominent evangelical intellectual has had run-ins with Trump already. Any prominent editor of any evangelical publication just about has had run-ins with Trump already and is questioned. Basically, any office holder in the Southern Baptist Convention or other major evangelical denominations, they've had problems with Trump. You've got to remember, these are the intellectual elites of evangelicalism. They're the ones who didn't support Trump in the primaries. They're the ones who supported people like Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. These are the people that evangelical support for Trump, that was partly a backlash against them. Okay, I've been saying this for years. Evangelical support for Trump was partly a backlash against their own leaders, right? It was a signal, we do not trust our own leaders to actually get the political results that we want. We don't like the fact that our own leaders are constantly moralizing at us, about what a bad, vulgar man Trump is. Because, hey, we're not perfect either. What we want is someone who'll fight for us, a fighter, not a pastor, as many people said. And as I've said before, if you just read into this a little bit, they actually wanted someone who they knew was not constrained by Christian morality, right? So at the moment, let's not get too excited about either evangelical Christian defections or Republican defections. We are not yet at a point where seriously damaging stuff is happening. But let us keep in mind, because I think we are at a point where it could happen. When it happens, it'll happen all at once.
I do agree with that.
Yeah, it was that old thing about the collapse, of the Soviet Union. How your society collapse slowly, and then suddenly all at once.
Yeah.
That's how it always happens. The classic political science work that explains this is by Timur Kuran. And it's to do with preference falsification. He says, in any environment where people are essentially forced to conceal their true preferences, right? He was talking about authoritarian regimes. He was talking about places like East Germany. But you could equally apply this to, Republican senators, where people are forced to conceal their true feelings. This, for a long time, can be quite effective in preventing any kind of rebellion, right? Because, in order for a rebellion to be effective, you're going to have to know that other people are going along with you. And if everyone is concealing their true feelings, then that keeps everything under control. But he says, there are always going to be some people out there who just don't give a shit, right? And they just decide, fuck it, my soul is not worth this. I don't care what the consequences are. I'm going out there to protest. And he said, so when people see that happen, they think, okay, I wonder how many more out there are. Then you get someone else who's perhaps not, crazy brave, but a little bit brave, who goes out there and says, "Look, me too. I'm in this. I'm in this with you as well." By the way, speaking of Me Too, this was how the dynamics of the Me Too movement happened as well. For years nothing, then all of a sudden, deluge. Right? When that happens, it doesn't take very long before suddenly everyone realizes, "Oh, holy shit! There are a lot more of us than I thought there were." And if we all act together, they can't punish us all.
I feel like, I agree with you about that, about everything you just said, but I feel like until there's an incentive for them to turn against him, then there's an obvious incentive for them to stay with him until at least the election.
Well, this is the thing. So you'd think this would have to be led by senators who aren't facing re-election in 2020. Now, Murkowski notably is not. She's facing re-election in 2022.
Yeah.
Trump tweeted today, "No one knows where they're going to be in 2 years, but I know exactly where I'm going to be. I'm going to be in Alaska campaigning against Lisa Murkowski."
He's probably right. He probably will be.
There's no way Trump's going to Alaska.
Okay. He'll be campaigning against her on Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. yeah. He's not going to physically be
That's true.
in Alaska.
Yes.
So it will be up to people who aren't immediately up for re-election.
We're all doing it.
It could be people who want to carve out a space for themselves in advance in 2024 as I'm the anti-Trump. I can lead this party back. Albeit, as we've already talked about, there are plenty of candidates carving themselves out as the second coming of Trump.
I wouldn't, if I was a Republican, I wouldn't put myself forward as running for 2024 too early, because otherwise Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley will stab them. One in each ear. So watch out, Republicans.
And Matt Gaetz.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, as you said, that lack of incentive is a problem.
Yeah.
But then again,
I do agree that
being seen as the rat who got off the ship, without getting too wet, there could be benefits.
There's no doubt there's a lot of Republicans who probably secretly hate Donald Trump. And once they think he's done, once they think he's lost, then I do think it will be people will just be dancing on the grave.
Yes.
Like the people who hate him. And I think there'll be a rush at that point in time. But just that's very late in the proceedings.
Look, I think there are going to be serious ethical kind of questions around. So how much credit do we give to someone who was silent for 3.5 years? And then as the ship was going down,
not much.
suddenly comes out with a lot of stories that could have been really damaging if they'd come out with them sooner.
Can I tell you one other thing about Joe Biden, by the way? This might
I'm always up for learning a new fact about Joe Biden.
I think this might qualify as a stat nugget.
Stat nugget.
I'd like you to guess. This has become a game show stat nugget. I'd like you to guess, Dr. Dave.
Yes.
Joe Biden has, during his entire 36 years in the Senate,
Yes.
every single year was always more liberal than what percentage of his Democratic colleagues?
Every single year.
Every single year, he was more liberal. So he was never less liberal than this percentage of his colleagues.
5%.
44%. But just
Really?
wait, there's a second part. I want you to tell me,
Whoops.
in that 36-year period,
Yeah.
he was always more conservative than at least what percentage of his colleagues?
56%.
43%. He, the entire time, was in 36 years, was between the 44th percentile and the 57th percentile of liberalism, according to the DW Nominate scale.
There you go.
Senate.
The middleman.
That is his thing. His thing is he always, always, always sticks in the middle and never takes any risks whatsoever. He's the most cynical politician ever. And that's his secret.
Yeah.
And you can see him right now recalibrating right now as the Democrats move
Yes,
around.
yeah.
He's on one hand saying, I'm not going to have any more taxes, and no one who earns less than $400,000 will pay more taxes. At the same time, he's going Amazon like Bernie Sanders. He's just trying to stay right in the middle. It's and that would drive me crazy if I was Trump, because it's so obvious the way he does it, but he gets away with it. That's Joe Biden. I would like to talk briefly about mail-in voting, because there's been a little bit
Yes.
of action in there. The main piece of action is there's been a court case decided in Texas, which is a lot of people have been talking about. In Texas, briefly, old people can vote absentee, or you need an excuse. In Texas, now there's a provision there that says a qualified voter is eligible for early voting by mail if the voter has a sickness or physical condition that prevents the voter from appearing at the polling place on election day without likelihood of needing personal assistance or of injuring the voter's health. Now, the court case was about this. The Democrats said the words physical condition included the physical condition of being susceptible to a deadly pandemic disease.
Yes.
Which
is something of a physical condition.
It's a clever angle.
Yes.
And so they were saying, well, during the pandemic, everyone qualified for early mail-in according to Texas law. They also said it violated the 26th Amendment, which permits all otherwise eligible voters over the age of 18 to cast a ballot.
Right.
Last week, the state Supreme Court in Texas, been going back and forth. The state Supreme Court in Texas decided that no, that only actually means people who are ill or disabled.
Yes.
Which, to be fair, that's probably a plain English language reading of that law.
Yeah.
It's fair enough to say if Texas politicians want you to be able to vote absentee, they will pass a law saying you can, rather than having to read into it. But anyway, that's been appealed. That's been appealed to the most conservative Court of Appeals, which is the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and into the Supreme Court.
By the way, the Texas legislature is a joke.
They never meet.
Yeah.
They meet 60 days a year or something.
Yeah. I've
Every
been
second year.
inside the Texas legislature in Austin. It's a very grand building. I remember they'd put up, I was there in early December in 2017, and they'd put up this massive Christmas tree right in the middle of the actual legislature. And it didn't matter because, you were in no danger of running into an actual legislator there. It is it's one of the least professionalized legislatures in the country.
Yeah, they should just rent it out. Anyway, I want to while I'm talking the mail-in, I just want to talk some of the partisan hackery going around at the moment about this. We obviously know Trump saying that you should need a good reason to vote absentee, even though he himself, when he voted absentee in Florida, he says you need a good reason. And in Florida, you supposedly need a good reason to vote absentee. He drove past a booth 4 times on the day when the election happened, and he voted absentee anyway. So, hypocrite. But that's not a surprise to anyone. The Democrats...
was it because he couldn't actually drive right up to the booth itself?
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't think he even acknowledges that. But anyway... the Democrats, as we know, are taking the other angle, and they're saying, Trump's says there's crime. No, there's no fraud whatsoever. And to be honest, the evidence suggests there isn't much. Oregon, 15 ballots. These are 15 voter fraud ballots out of 15 million over 19 years. Mm-hmm. Colorado, 14 voter fraud ballots out of 16 million in 13 years. Yep. Washington, 12 voter fraud ballots out of 10.6 million in 6 years. Hawaii, 2 out of 7 million in 34 years.
Right.
But I just want to be fair here.
Yeah.
Until Democrats decided about 5 years ago that they were going to be advantaged by mail-in voting. And by the way, we're going to get to that. They're not going to be. But until they decided...
Might have to get to that next week, I think.
Oh, don't we have 10 more minutes?
We do.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, this is going to be quick. It's going to be quick. Honestly, this is quick. I promise. In 2012, the New York Times published an article called Error and Fraud at Issue as Absentee Voting Rises. And the quote, here's some quotes. There is a bipartisan consensus that voting by mail is more easily abused than other forms. Votes cast by mail are less likely to be counted, more likely to be compromised, and more likely to be contested than those cast in the voting booth. Republican officials in particular have pushed to expand absentee voting because the conventional wisdom is that Republicans use absentee ballots and Democrats vote early. That was in 2012. Things have obviously changed since then. But also there was a commission on federal election reform in 2005 that also found absentee ballots remain the largest source of potential voter fraud. That was chaired by Jimmy Carter, amongst others. Ask Van Jones. He'll tell you all about that. But anyway, but the truth is, let's leave aside hypocrisy.
Yeah.
The truth is that there are things that can make mail-in voting extremely insecure. If you don't check people's signature, that is insecure. Mm-hmm. Right? Colorado checks your signature with a machine.
Yes.
If it says it doesn't match, they then call you up and say, your signature didn't match. Come on in, let's sort this out. And that way you don't miss out on your vote. But at the same time, it's very difficult to vote for someone else.
Yes.
Right? But so signature checks are important. Ballot harvesting, we've talked about on this show before. I won't go into it again. But basically, if you're a state that cares about fraud, you rule that people are only allowed to either have them or their carers or their family members hand in their ballots rather than some dude who comes in with 100 ballots. That's what you don't want, okay? Okay, so it can be insecure, but it can be secure if you care and you just pass these reasonable laws, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is why California's a little bit of a concern at the moment because they're just mailing out vote ballots to everyone and they have ballot harvesting and God knows what happens there. The good news is Democrats win by such a long way. There's probably not going to be any fraud there anyway. But the GOP suit about that, in my view, that's a reasonable lawsuit because I feel like California's a bit dodgy. But let's talk the studies. The studies say, so I told you I'll be quick. There's a 2000 study from Oregon found that voting by mail did not bring substantial numbers of new voters, nor did it have any effect on whether the electorate was more Democratic or more Republican.
There you go.
There was a study between 1998 and 2018, 20 years, studying California, Utah, Washington, and Oregon. They found the expansion of vote by mail does not appear to tilt turnout towards the Democratic Party, nor does it appear to affect election outcomes meaningfully. No. So there you go. And apart from all this, I'm going somewhere here. This whole argument is insane for Trump to take on.
Yes.
Because 30 states now effectively have mail-in voting anyway.
Yes.
Because they have no excuse absentee ballots.
Tennessee today, there was a court case in Tennessee just today.
There you go. And
Tennessee's are now no excuse state.
So that's 31 states, right?
Yeah.
And it's increasing all the time. And the worst of all for Trump, if there's one state he needs to win, it's Wisconsin.
Yes.
Right? Wisconsin has agreed, and this is including the Republicans, I can't believe it, has agreed to mail out applications for their absentee votes to all registered voters. So Trump arguing against mail-in voting, say it's all fraud and say Republicans shouldn't do it is insane because what's going to happen is they won't register for mail-in voting. Only Democrats will, and that will lose him votes.
Yes.
And there's a great article in the Philly Inquirer just this week about this, it was last week, where they said, as of last week, 1.3 million registered Democrats had requested and been approved for mail ballots for their primary, compared to 524,000 Republicans. And I know the Democrats had a competitive primary, but now they don't.
No.
And still, there's more than twice as many. Republicans made up 29% of the requests, even though they represent 38% of the registered voters. And here's a quote from Lee Snova, the chairman of the Northampton County GOP. Our county is kind of a Trump county. We're kind of listening to Trump on this. He's spoken about it. He's tweeted about it. He doesn't want us to do it. He's losing himself the election.
That is
with his mail-in
that is a
voting thing.
massive own goal. Because
Yeah.
I mean, I think Trump can still win this. It's not over
Totally.
by any means, but to do it is going to require mastery of the kind of machinery that the Republican Party had before.
Yes.
Which I am completely opposed to with every fiber of my being. But just pointing out, they're not doing it as effectively this time, anywhere near as effectively this time as they were last time.
They are not. They are not. Now, do you have anything else you want to cover? You've got 5 minutes.
Yes,
go for it.
because was it last week we were talking about this issue of church opening?
I had it right here, but I wasn't going to bring it up, but yes.
Yes, and I didn't realise that there actually was a case before the Supreme Court from
That
California.
Which you only won 5-4.
Only won 5-4.
By the skin of your teeth.
There's a mixed result. I thought it was going to be like 9-0, but okay, yeah, it was 5-4 with Roberts siding with the majority. And so
Yes.
this was that, no, it was churches can't appeal. Well, it's not they can't appeal,
Yeah.
but the First Amendment doesn't mean churches have to, the state has to allow churches to open.
Yeah, but basically, I won't go through all my notes here. I'll just summarize it very briefly. Roberts said that churches are different to all the stores that have less restrictions than churches, because in churches you sing and you're close together for an hour.
Yes.
It's not like a grocery store where you just go in and go out.
Yeah.
And so he said, therefore, they can have different rules for churches than they can for everything else, which California does.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas Kavanaugh said he was in the minority. He said, no, they're all the same. You can, as long as the church can follow the same processes that the grocery stores can, with far as social distancing goes and hygiene, then you should be forced to treat them exactly the same.
Yeah.
And so he was opposed for that
somehow
reason.
underestimating what a dickhead Kavanaugh is. Sorry about that. But anyway,
So it's 5-4.
yeah, we both lost.
Yes, we did. But
Both our analysis was slightly off, but
we're both very close.
yeah. But for the time being, the jurisprudence does remain that that is not an undue burden. Well, if it is an undue burden, the state has a compelling reason for doing it. The First Amendment is not absolute. That protection of religious freedom is not absolute. This also relates to what we've talked about before, which is the mutating role of Justice Roberts in the public consciousness, which is, despite the fact that by basically any measure he is a very historically sort of right-wing figure, and he has presided over one of the most right-wing courts in recent history. Nonetheless, I can already see the gnashing of the teeth that here's another example of a Republican-appointed conservative justice who's gone liberal. Now, of course, he hasn't. It's just that the right has moved kind of dramatically to the right. But, yeah, this is No More Robertses is going to be like what No More Suitors used to be.
I think you're absolutely right. And can I say, the biggest news out of that court case was in Roberts's judgment.
Yep.
He foreshadowed big trouble for the other side, for the conservatives on this, which was, I'll read you the quote, because this one deserves a quote. Our Constitution principally entrusts the safety and health of the people to the politically accountable officials of the states to guard and protect, he said. And those politically accountable officials should not be subject to second guessing by an unelected federal judiciary which lacks the background, competence, and expertise to assess public health and is not accountable to the people. He just slammed a chair on Brett Kavanaugh and the conservatives.
Wow,
there.
he's questioning Brett Kavanaugh's background, competence, and expertise on public health.
That is bitchy for a judge. That's mean girl stuff right there. So
this is what happens when people spend any time with Brett Kavanaugh.
So the next few years might be interesting with Judge Roberts and that court. So I'm not saying that's going to necessarily go all the way, but just that.
Brett Kavanaugh should just
emerge.
take himself off to be honorary president of some frat at Emory or something.
Dave, do you like Brett Kavanaugh? Just out of curiosity. I reckon we've probably done enough.
We are
We've done
out
our
of
dash,
time.
but there's time for one more thing. There's always time for one more thing.
No. Before you do this, let's talk about what we were talking about. So the guests issue.
Oh, yeah.
So if we're going to have...
Oh, we're going to have guests. Dr. Dave, I'm sorry, you're not
love-
special. they want the guests.
I'm completely
No, I know.
happy
I know.
with that.
And secretly, they do actually love you. They just want guests as well.
Okay.
They all say, we'll have a guess, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
On that, but we still haven't really identified a suitable guest.
Oh, we're gonna have a few guests. We'll cycle through them a bit. I'm not gonna do it every week. Okay, I'm not gonna do it every week,
Okay.
but I will get one of our. There's one of our writers. I think will be very, very good.
Yes.
I'll get her next week.
Great.
But after that, I'm not sure who it'll be. But yeah, we'll roll through them.
Yeah. I'm
Now-
all about expanding the talent pool.
It's time for what everyone's been
Time
waiting
for me to go.
and Pepperbox. Come on, what are you doing?
Thank you, Chaz's laptop.
Oh, there we are. There you go. Bye, Dr. Dave. Bye, Peppers.